Good evening and welcome to Alan's Italy. Today's show, Alan's Italy number 127, will focus on the side trips that we took during our last trip from Siena to the two towns of Volterra and Monteriggioni. Now, we selected Siena as our base for 4 nights, not with the expectation that we would be spending all 4 days just exploring Siena. The idea was actually to find a place in Tuscany that was a pretty fairly large city, not like Florence, but we wanted to be close to Florence, and yet we wanted to be in a place where our friends Lidia and Luca could come to where we were in Siena and take us around to various places I had in mind. Now, you're looking at a map right now of Siena, and what I did was basically to look at that map and to see what was around it, to the east and to the west and the north and the south, because these were places in Tuscany that might hold some interest for us. So, I kind of looked around, and as you're looking now at this map, and I decided that we would head to the west, where the town of Volterra was located. And this was a town that we were supposed to have visited back in 2009, but it just didn't work out. Without going into too many details, it didn't work out for us, but this is a town that we wanted to visit. And I noticed, as you are noticing now, that if you go to Volterra and then work your way back east towards Siena, you come to the town of Monteriggioni, which is really an extraordinary hill town. And we felt that we would, that Lidia would come to pick us up in Siena. We would then go west to Volterra, spend a little time there, have lunch, and then head back to Siena by way of Monteriggioni and spend some time there, and then wind up back in Siena. Now, Lidia couldn't bring her car into the city of Siena. Nobody really can unless they're a resident or have special permission. So we had to meet her outside the area known as the ZTL. And you're looking at that sign now for ZTL, which means in Italian, Zona Traffico Limitato, which basically means that if you cross that line that cars are not allowed to cross, you could receive a summons. So we had to find a place close to the hotel where we would be able to meet with Lidia and then immediately drive out to the other parts of Tuscany. And as I said, the idea was to go directly to Volterra and then work our way back. So what you're going to see now is our experience traveling to and arriving in Volterra. So here we are in Volterra, and what I'm going to do is what I did when we did the Siena show, and that is I'm going to show you several pictures of the town of Volterra, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and some of the other aspects of it. So you're now beginning to look at the town, and it is 2,300. The town was first created in 2300 BC, so that was from the Bronze Age. That goes back pretty far. It was settled by the Etruscans and was considered one of the 12 cities of the Etruscan League, which was a group of Italian cities that composed kind of like a military alliance during that time. And now we're not talking about 2300 BC, we're talking more about, I would say, 1000 BCE and the site was believed, though, to have been continuously settled since the end of the 8th century BCE. So the first millennium BCE. The town was known as a municipium during Roman times. The Romans conquered most of the Etruscan cities and then attempted to incorporate the cities within the sphere of Rome. And, it was a semi-independent state during the Roman times, and was a community that was eventually incorporated into the Roman state after the Etruscan League was dissolved. At first, the inhabitants were considered citizens of Rome, but without voting rights, but eventually gained more and more rights. And, Rome did this for a number of reasons, not least of which was for protection. Volterra was a couple of hundred miles north of Rome, but Rome liked to create this, periphery of protection from foreign invaders. And also, the town was expected to supply troops to the Roman army. Volterra served as a bishop's residence during the 5th century AD, which gives the town a certain amount of prominence. So obviously this was considered to be one of the preeminent towns in Italy during the 5th century. Of course, during the Middle Ages, the town of Volterra was conquered by Florence in the Middle Ages, and then in the year 1530 came under the control of the Medici family. And of course, the conflict that Volterra experienced probably somehow was swept up in the more major conflict between Florence and Siena, which dominated the Middle Ages. Now Volterra is predominantly a tourist town. There's a lot of tourists in the town, and there are a number of things you could see. One of the things that we found fascinating, and I had seen this many years ago when I visited the town with Lidia, was the Roman theater. And you're looking at that now, the ruins of the Roman theater, which were quite amazing. It's not really very well preserved, but pretty good. And that's a very interesting thing to see. Just outside of the town itself, you could also see the Etruscan Museum. It's a very extensive Etruscan museum with some very, very interesting things, some of which you're now looking at. You could also go to the Volterra Cathedral with works by Mino da Fiesole and Benozzo Gozzoli, and also Andrea della Robbia, incidentally, all of whom were Florentine artists. You could also see within the town the Fortezza Medicea, which was the fortress that protected the town itself. One of the things that I found very interesting about the town, there are several very notable people who came from the town, namely a fellow named Perseus, who was a Roman satirist during the 1st century BCE, and also Daniele da Volterra. You're now looking at his picture. He lived from 1509 to 1566. He was a Mannerist painter and sculptor, remembered as a friend of Michelangelo. In fact, Michelangelo lived with him, Daniele da Volterra, in his home in Rome. I had heard about this fellow, and I did a little more research, and I found out the following things. I had actually heard about him because there is a portrait of Michelangelo that he started. It's an unfinished painting in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There's also a portrait bust in the Uffizi, and I remember seeing both of those when I visited those two museums, and I came to the conclusion that this fellow, Daniele da Volterra, must have played a very, very big role in Michelangelo's life. One of the things that he did was when one of there was a knee from a sculpture that he had in his house and was contained in his will. And there's still controversy as to whether this knee was part of Michelangelo's deposition, which is in Florence, or part of the knee of the Rondinini Pietà, which is in Milan, both of which, of course, I've seen. And no one is too sure which sculpture it comes from. So there's a little controversy about this online. It's very interesting because he mentions the broken piece as part of a Pietà, which would make it, therefore, part of the Rondinini Pietà in Milan, as opposed to part of the deposition, which is a different type of, it's sort of a Pietà, but it's more Jesus being removed from the cross, which is actually in Florence. But that's, a very moot point. But he has a very dubious distinction, and that is that when Michelangelo died, Michelangelo had painted, after he did the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, the Last Judgment behind the high altar. And Daniele da Volterra was given the job of painting over the genitals of Michelangelo. Michelangelo portrayed himself in the nude within the painting The Last Judgment, which of course you're now looking at. And when Michelangelo had passed away and could no longer protest the fact, Daniele da Volterra was given the job of painting breeches on the nude figure of Michelangelo in itself. And that brings us to the end of the Volterra segment of the show. And we're now going to move on to the next segment. Okay, so when we left Volterra, we were just given this spectacular ride through some magnificent scenery. And you're looking at one of them right now. And we just simply pulled over because we just saw this restaurant amid the spectacular Tuscan scenery. And it was really something. So we stopped there, took some pictures, and really got the feeling of this magnificent scenery. We also stopped at this location that you're now looking at. This is called La Balza. And what it is an arrangement of sandstone resulting in just spectacular landscapes through, erosion of limestone and sandstone and alabaster, all contribute to the features of this extraordinary landscape. The word La Balza refers to, in English, it's translated to the ravines. And although we couldn't, we were prevented from, it was kind of like a valley, so it was difficult to get to right up close. But we did do some photographing through the gate, if I remember correctly. And eventually, in a very, very short time, of course, we had lunch in Volterra. We felt that would be the appropriate thing to do. And then in the mid-afternoon, we went to the town of Monteriggioni. And Monteriggioni is a medieval hill town located on a natural hillock built by Siena between the years 1214 and 1219 as a front line in their wars against Florence. A lot of the things that took place during this, in this segment of this section of Italy were all related to the battles that took place between Florence and Siena. The position was strategically located on the Via Cassia, which was a road that went from the south near Rome going up north. And the Romans used that road to bring supplies and armaments and soldiers to various parts of western Italy. The town withstood many attacks from Florence and from the Bishop of Volterra, believe it or not, because Volterra was a powerful city. And, you're looking now at some beautiful photographs of the city of Monteriggioni. Now, one of the things that you're looking at are views of the town from the walkway. So you're looking now at this walkway. We hadn't been in Monteriggioni for quite a number of years. I don't believe we were even there for a good 10 years. And in the interim period, they built a walkway right around the interior part of the walls. And it was really nice because you were able to walk around and get this magnificent view of the town. Continuing with the history, in 1554, the Sienese gave the town to a fellow by the name of Zetti, who promptly handed over the keys of the town to the Medici. And this is considered a great betrayal among the people who, even to this day live in Monteriggioni. The town itself has 14 towers, 2 gates, the Porta Fiorentina, which of course faces north, and the Porta Romana, which of course faces south. The Porta Fiorentina, of course, is the gate that leads to the road that takes you to Florence, and the Porta Romana is the gate that leads you to the road that takes you south to Rome. And there's a main street which connects the 2 gates. The church in the town that you're now looking at is Romanesque. The poet Dante wrote a poem about the town, and he indicates that in part of the poem, it indicates, as with circling round of turrets, Monteriggioni crowns its walls. So even back then, you could see that it's just a beautiful, beautiful, well-preserved walled town in central Tuscany. And that brings us to the end of our journeys to the west of Siena that Lidia so graciously drove us around that afternoon. And now just a little bit about the next show number 128. We'll focus on another trip that we took in Tuscany, this time that our friend Luca came to Siena and drove us to an area to the south of Siena known as the Val d'Orcia. And that's what the topic of the next show will be. Until then, I hope you enjoyed looking at 2 really extraordinary Tuscan towns. And until the next show, buonanotte e buona fortuna.